Okay. Hello again, YouTubers, musicians, guitar players, and everyone else who's interested in gear. Welcome to my video talking about tone philosophies on how I dial in my tone. So, stick around. Okay, so today I wanted to talk about dialing in tones. Being a sort of like you could say a touring musician, I play in a band called Stellar Addiction. We tour nationally, within Australia, internationally as well. And there are some things that you encounter. So for example, when you're touring and you're going to, let's say, for example, Japan or something, or Philippines, you will be faced with amplifiers that you're not familiar with, equipment that you're not familiar with. So it's good to have a certain philosophy of how to set up your tone. The way I set up my tone is, I set up with practicality in mind, and the reasons being, one of the things that I make sure of when I'm dialing my tone is I have to be able to hear myself. I don't want to tread on other people's frequencies. Like for example, on the one of the most common ways guitar players tread on one of those instances is having too much bass, for example, and that means you're treading onto the bass player's frequencies and the drummer's frequencies as well, the kick drums and the toms and all that, and sometimes too much highs. You'd be fighting with the cymbals, and also with that it sounds too shrill. You don't want people having being on stage and people's tone there's too much treble. There's a lot of factors that contribute to that, but things like that. So everything in a balance. So the way I think about it is I don't really think that that it has to be, the tone has to be the way I like it, 24/7 all the time. Sometimes you have to compromise, so I'm going to explain some of the things while I'm going to go ahead and show you what I mean with my philosophies regarding tone shaping. So right here we have a Marshall DSL15H head. Okay, so the signal chain is pretty much my custom 24 gone wireless, just because I don't want to be using cables today or ever really. And it goes on to the Marshall DSL15H. The DSL15H goes to Vintage 30, which is housed in the Blackstar HT5R cabinet. I'm just using it's a combo, but I'm just using the cab to house the speaker. And it's being mic'd by an Interlink DM57 microphone. This is accompanied by a Superlux PR228A, and that's generally a tom mic, but it seems to work for this application. Just look up Spectre Sound Studios, Glenn Fricker. He has a video on how he shapes up his how he mics his tone for metal. I found that quite useful. I'm going to link that on the card there. So watch that one. It's pretty interesting. And my microphones go into a Scarlett 2i2 USB interface, audio interface, and it's I've got my recording for the mic as well as the camera microphone for me talking. So starting off with the Marshall DSL, usually with amplifiers, when I'm faced with an amp that I'm unfamiliar with, for example, we'll just use the DSL for today for demonstration. I usually start off with the EQ, the tone knobs, the EQ, the treble, bass, mid, and all, starting at 12, and I'd probably have the gain at 12 as well. So in this instance, we'll be starting off at the dirty channel, distortion channel. Okay, so all of those, let's give it some volume. Let's turn on our wireless and our battery. Okay, so there's a bit of sound coming through there. Let's give it a bit of volume. So just gotta be careful not to peak the microphone, so I'll be observing the tone, sorry, the levels. So that's pretty much the bass tone of this amp's distortion ultra gain channel. So usually to me it sounds pretty good right now. It sounds pretty decent, but I'd like to shape it up so that it suits my playing style. Okay. Now for me, that's straight away the thing that I'm thinking about when I'm playing that is I think about the gain straight away. For me, that's too mushy for me. It's too saturated for my taste. I like a tight sounding rhythm, so I back that gain down. I'll start off at, like, let's say next to minimal, and then work it up from there. I usually use the some chugging, and I use that to gauge it. I usually wait for it to, as I'm chugging, I'll wait for it to get a bit crunchy. So like this. That sort of thing where it's sort of in the edge of breakup. We'll play with it a little bit more. Right about 2 on the dial, 2 out of 10 on the dial is where I usually would leave it, because it sounds, there's a balance of tightness and saturation, crunchiness, and so probably just a little bit more there. Next thing I'm thinking about right there is the bass. It sounds a bit too big. So like it's a bit bloated, you know. So I start the bass off at 0 and then work it up from there. So the way I do this is when I dial it in, I wait for the sound to start having some body, start having some punch. This is something that I learned from John Petrucci. So get it up to a level until it gets flubby, and then once it starts to get flubby, back it down a little bit until it's just a tightness, and the tone has some weight to it, some body, and that's usually where I like it as well. So going to 0, working our way up. So that's usually where I would leave it, around 2, maybe just a little bit, but mostly on just 2 for this particular amp. Okay. There you go. It's a nice balance of weight, body, and tightness. Now the next thing I'm thinking about there is the treble. The way I set up my treble is a fine balance between the sound, brightness, clarity, and be careful of not being shrill, because that's you could easily get your sound shrill if you're not careful with treble, especially because guitar speakers are very directional. So sometimes people tend to have their guitar cabs on the floor, and they overcompensate with a treble, and usually in some cases, probably most cases, more than you should want is the cabs facing the audience dead on, and it's kind of have a bit of sympathy for the audience, that they let them have a good time instead of slicing their head off with all that treble, all that shrill action. So usually with me, I usually do the same thing, and until I find that balance when it's bright and clear enough. So starting off from 0, working my way up. And I forgot, with these frequencies, I usually do a quick sweep from 0 to 10, and then see how it how it expresses each point in the dial from 1 to 10. 12 o'clock is usually where I like this. In this instance, that seems to be where I like it, right there. And on the middle, in the middle is, with this one, I usually like to have it nearly wide open, or maybe not so much wide open, but I set it pretty high because I like to find the point of when the sound starts getting like a bit growly, or it sounds like there's a roar on it, and it's higher than I used to have before. So start off from 0, and then I'm going to go through the whole range and see how it reacts. In this case, I like it how it sounds at around 8. That's when you hear it sounds. That's when you hear the roaring sound of the amp. Lastly is the presence. This amp has a presence knob, and maybe sorry, not lastly, because there's also the deep knob. I usually just leave the deep switch in this particular amp, because the deep switch is what the amp would naturally sort of give out. So I might as well leave it in. And also, it seems I've already tweaked the bass. The way I tweak the bass is with it on. Okay, so with the presence knob, it's sort of like polishing your tone. It's it's post after the, I forgot what the term is. It's sort of like at the power amp EQ sort of thing. If I don't quite get the amp, still don't completely understand that, but it's sort of like a finishing touch, if you will. So starting at 0, going through the entire sweep, and then seeing how it affects your tone, and then that's how I dial it in. There you go. So I thought I liked it at 5 in this amp, but I backed it up to about 4 because it was starting to sound a little too chirpy for my taste, and really it's sounding really sharp for my taste. So I backed it up a little bit. So that is pretty much the way I would set my tone. If, for example, I was unfamiliar with an amp, that's how I would set it. So doing a little playthrough with the tone. So that's some basic tones there that I would have in a typical gig if I was faced with unfamiliar amplifiers. Normally I rely on my distortion pedal, which is an Exotic Effects BB Plus. That's a type of sound that it gives a type of sound that I like, and I've dialed it in with the same concept as this. And in the off chance that even if the pedal fails, or if I forget to, if someone stole my equipment and then I had to use other stuff, this is the kind of philosophy that I would fall back to. Seems to work. It's just that if you're faced with amps that don't have enough distortion, then you're probably going to have to improvise and find another way, maybe a borrow distortion pedal, and then maybe see if you can apply similar concepts like this. That's what I would do. I don't know how you would do it, but yeah, this is just a bit of a share of how I would do it, my preference, and how it suits the way I do it, the way it suits my playing style, and also the way it suits in the context of my band. And yeah, so hopefully you got something useful out of this. Hopefully this helps you kind of saves you from disaster from a kind of like a tragedy when you're in a show and you're faced with like, oh no, my gear was stolen or whatever, and then something like this would come in handy. Hope that helps you with that. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below, click the like button, maybe subscribe for more stuff. Thank you if you will. If not, then maybe you'd subscribe next time, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And that's about it. That's all I got to say about that. So, thank you for watching. See you in the next video.
The diamond shower